teens, here we go again. We're going to be talking about the promise of victory. The promise of victory, this is going to be in Joshua starting in chapter 2. So if you want to head on over there with the Word of God, that'd be great. But we're going to be talking about God responds to whoever calls on His mercy. And what do you mean by that? Well, we get into this. I'll give you a little illustration. And you might have heard this before, but one time Keely was doing photography for a wedding, and it was a Halloween wedding, Halloween themed, so kind of spooky, and so it was out kind of in the middle of nowhere on some back roads, and she got done. It was rainy, muddy, and there's dirt roads, and all of a sudden she found out that the tire was flat. Well, this was like an hour and a half away. She calls me, and it's like, you got to call a tow truck. It'll be midnight by the time I actually get over there. It's gonna be late, and you got to call a tow truck. It's gonna be worse off for me coming. So we ended up calling a tow truck. But in that moment, Keely, my wife, I imagine felt pretty vulnerable. She was totally at the mercy of someone else because she wasn't able to fix the tire herself, and so she had to call someone else, and so she's totally at the mercy of someone other than herself. And you say, what are you talking about here? What's happening? Well, we come to a story where in Joshua chapter 2 we meet a person named Rahab. Now, she's a prostitute, but she's heard about God, and she's in the city of Jericho. Jericho's heard about Israel and what God has done, and they've retreated and back into their city. And in fact, let's just jump into the chapter here. Chapter 2 and verse 8 through 13. It says, "And before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof." And you say, what are you talking about? Well, Rahab had invited the two spies that Joshua sent into Jericho into her place of residence to hide them, to give them information. Why? Because she believed God. She had heard about God secondhand, and she believed in Him, and knew that He was God. I mean, it was a faith thing. She knew what was going to happen. She knew that Jericho was going to be conquered. And so she actually harbors these spies and then places herself at the mercy of God Himself. But in verse 9 it says, "And she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what ye did unto the two kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I've showed you kindness, that ye will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token, and that ye will save alive my father and my mother and my brethren and my sisters and all that ye have, and deliver our lives from death." So Rahab, finally, she's safe harbored these spies, and she throws herself at the mercy of these two spies who's got to relay this information to Joshua, and at Joshua, whatever he states, and God, who she's believing in, she says, you're going to conquer. I'm giving myself to you. I'm helping you out. Please help me and my family. But she not only believed, she placed her life in God's hands. Think about this for yourself. When has it ever come to that point where you've gone and you've heard about God, and not just believing, but placing your life in His hands? I mean, that's salvation. It's, I believe, I have faith that you will save me. When have you done that for yourself? But she's come to the point where when she's put herself at the mercy of others, this isn't prioritizing her weakness. okay? But it is getting rid of, it's chipping away at the pride and independence. You say, wait a minute, we're independent, we're Americans. I'm not fighting the independence of America. I love our freedoms. God gives them to us so we can worship, and yet there's a lot of stuff going on here in this time period during this coronavirus that's a little iffy, but we're not getting into that. But it comes down to this point where pride and independence, the thought process that we can do everything that needs to be done for ourselves, and we don't need anybody. That is anti-gospel. Because the gospel states that we are not enough. We need Christ. We need God. We need His way. We need His word. These are the things that God's called us to do. So really think about this for yourself. Put yourself in her shoes where she's just totally put her faith in God Himself, knowing who He is, the Almighty. So they asked her to put a scarlet cord out of her window so that they could know who she was, to kind of set her apart. That's the token. And God gives the battle plan to Joshua, which, quite honestly, isn't much of a battle plan. It's a plan, but there's not a battle. And just in the sense of what they're supposed to do is have the priests and the Ark of the Covenant and everybody walking around the city one time a day for 6 days. The horns blowing, the trumpets blowing, but nobody can say anything. Until the seventh day, they're supposed to walk around 7 times, and then on the 7th, everybody's supposed to shout. And that thought process, I mean, what kind of questions would be brought up in your mind? Is this going to work? I mean, you'd have to put yourself at the mercy of God here as the Israelites. And just in that sense of, okay, they could attack us at any moment, and all we're doing is walking around. Is this really what you want to do, God? Yes, have faith in what God states here. So this is what they do. And in Joshua chapter 6, verse 15 through 17, we see here, Joshua chapter 6, verse 15, and it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose up early about the dawning of the day and compassed the city after the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. And it came to pass on the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. And the city shall be accursed, even it and all that are therein, to the Lord. Only Rahab, the harlot, the prostitute, shall live, she and all that are with her in her house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. Verse 20, so the people shouted with the priests, blew with the trumpets. They shouted when the priests blew with the trumpets, and it came to pass, when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat. So that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man, woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword. And so they conquer Jericho. This is what happens. God's plan was successful. They conquered Jericho. But you know, Rahab, her house was saved. Put yourself in the shoes of Rahab here, or the sandals, whatever she was wearing. City's in ruin. She's got nothing left except for her family. I mean, they've survived the collapse. What's going to happen? Are they gonna go back on the plan here? Are they going to fulfill their promises? Is God really going to save me when she is from Jericho? This must be all the things that would be going through her mind, the concern, but yet she trusted in God. And God followed through. When have you trusted in God and has God followed through in your life? When does that happen? He does it so many times. Sometimes we don't even realize it. But when does that happen for you personally? In verse 22 through 25 it says, but Joshua said unto the two men that had spied out the country, Go into the harlot's house, and bring out thence the woman and all that she hath, as ye swear unto her. And the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brethren and all that she had, and they brought out all her kindred, and left them without the camp of Israel. And they burnt the city with fire, and all that was therein, only the silver and gold, only the vessels of brass and iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua saved Rahab and the harlot alive, and her father's household, and all that she had, and she dwelled in Israel even unto this day, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent out to spy out Jericho. So God ends up following through. She's brought into the camp. She's made a part of the people of God. She believed in God. He's saying, okay, so what's all this about? What's the Christ connection? What's the doctrine that we're going to lay out here for today? The Christ connection is part of the doctrine. Rahab threw herself at the mercy of God, and God gave mercy. She had faith. Jesus came. If we throw ourselves at his mercy, he does give it. That's the gospel. That's the Christ connection. But another part of the Christ connection is the very fact that Rahab ended up being a part of the Messianic line. She ended up being part of the family of Jesus. She was the great, I don't know how many great-grandmother of Jesus Christ. What a cool, awesome truth that's on display. Someone who had a messed up life, who was in sin, now believes in God and becomes a part of the line of Jesus. God uses people, broken people, for his extraordinary plan. The doctrine, we're going to be talking about the people of God. What do you mean? Those who have faith. There's two different terms here in dealing with the church. Okay, you have the local church, who is what we have here at Grace is a local representation of the church as a whole, the universal church. And I'll get into that. But the local church is where believers are actually coming together and representing everyone from the universal church, all past, present, and future believers. So when we have faith, it doesn't matter whether you're Jew or you're Gentile, whether you're a slave, whether you're free, man, woman, child, adult, doesn't matter who you are, because you get made new when you're a child of God, the family of God. You have faith. And so she ends up getting brought into the people of God because of her faith, same way that you can be brought into the family of God with your faith in God, in the gospel. So important. You get to be a part of his family. Have you chipped away at your pride and independence to come to that conclusion that salvation is the only way, as Jesus stated it in John 14:6? Something you need to be thinking about here today. And if so, enjoy the fact that you are a part of the people of God. And it's okay to throw yourself at the mercy of God, because God gives it. You have a good one. We'll talk to you later.